is Control Camp. Control Camp, we are a community of folks who gather together all in the interest of sync licensing. So this is all music that's related to music for television, music for ads, music for video games, music for anything that needs to be synchronized to screen, and thus the word sync and sync licensing, sync placements you might hear people talking about. So every Wednesday, we are here on Clubhouse at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, talking variety of topics with a variety of people in the space. I'm your host, Eric Campbell. I'm a songwriter, producer, sync creator. I've been writing music for television, film, and ads for a little over a decade now. I have lots of music on television. I've worked on TV shows. I've had placements on ads on lots of different sync channels. And I share what I know freely. So if you're here, it's because you either want to learn or contribute to, or just be part of a community. I think sync one of the things we all are eager to have, not just in this time, with the pandemic, but just in general, is the ability to form community as composers, as executives, and Control Camp is here to kind of facilitate that space. So if you want to know more about us, you can follow the camp if you look at the icon above my picture, there's it looks like a greenhouse. You can click on that, and that will you can follow the club. If you follow the club, you'll also have access to our after party that starts at 10 p.m. Eastern, right after this room ends. That is our social hour. This next 2 hours is going to be very formatted, very curated. We'll have a formal discussion. We'll do some Q&A and breaks throughout the couple of hours. But then in our social hour, it's really anybody come up to the stage and we don't talk music. We just kind of get to know one another. And that's really where our relationships in this community have been born. So I encourage you to follow the camp because that's the only way that the after party shows up in your hallway. All right, I'm going to do a couple of announcements, and then we're going to get into this discussion. If you were here Saturday, we had an amazing listening session. We did a listening session for Steve Davis of the famous group. They were looking for epic hip hop for some of the sports teams that they work with. They work with some sports teams in all of the major franchises and so all of the leagues. And so we put out a brief for the last few weeks, and we got over 50 submissions. About 19 of those submissions were included in the playlist that we played on Saturday, and Steve was incredibly grateful. The panel gave really good feedback, just describing what makes music cinematic and what makes things work for sports. So if you were there, I know I got a lot of messages from you all that you found it like a great education. What was really cool is 2 days later, Steve messaged me saying, "Hey, this was really timely because I just got a brief and I need some cinematic hip hop." And he's an editor. So the way the editing works is a lot of times they need to hear a song to picture first so they can pitch it to their clients and see if it works. And he actually requested instrumentals for 6 of the songs that he heard in the listening session on Saturday. And so none of that doesn't guarantee a placement, because what he does then he takes those instrumentals and he puts them to picture, pitches them to the client and says, "Hey, this is kind of the visual that we envision for your ad." But the fact that he's using some of our music for that, if it goes forward, some of you have a good chance of landing something from that. And he's kept all 19 songs that were in the playlist. So, as other things come up, he'll have those to pull from. So we were really excited that went well. I'll do a future thing. We also learned some notes to share with some people in the room. Like some people didn't have instrumentals attached to their songs. So if you are doing pitches in the future, always be sure to include your instrumentals. This is why it's good to use a service like Disco or Box, or something where you can include multiple versions of your song. You can have your full instrumental, you can have your full mix, you can have your instrumental, you can have all your metadata, you can have high res versions, as well as MP3s that the person can download. We spent a little bit of time trying to chase people down Monday when he was asking for it, and at least one person kind of missed out because they were not able to get their instrumentals in time. So lessons learned for all of us for next time. But I'm really excited that he found that session so useful. A couple of other announcements. As if I said in the very beginning, if I don't know what it shows on your phone, it might tell you that replays are on. They have just launched replays on Clubhouse, and so these rooms, we were always recording the rooms. We would do it in my studio in Ableton, and then upload it to our Patreon group, and only the Patreon members had access to the replays. But now that Clubhouse has rolled this out site wide, it's the replay access is available to everyone. So this is going to be the first test. We're recording tonight. We have replays on, so we should be posting to our profile page afterwards. So if you miss out or don't catch all these going forward, you should be able to always see that on our profile page. For our Patreon members, I've really appreciated the support. I'm going to do a post on the Patreon, but just if you're here, because Clubhouse now has these replays, we will probably not be doing the audio and the posting of the audio to YouTube. That would just be double work. So I see some of our Patreon members in here now. If I want you to message me, I'm thinking of doing some other perks to replace the audio recordings, maybe like a regular group coaching just for Patreon members, or that we'll do on Zoom. We'll do like a Zoom gathering at a regular interval for Patreon members. So if you feel like that's a cool idea, then back channel me or DM me. Or if you got another suggestions, let me know that because I want to make sure that you know how much you appreciate it. And lastly, I will be issuing a call really soon for volunteers. Some of you have asked me and messaged me, how can you help Control Camp grow? And I have some big plans, and I definitely we'll be looking for some assistance and help. So within the next week, you're going to see me posting a skills assessment, probably through our stories and on our site. Anybody who wants to help, if you've got, I don't know everybody in the community what you have. Some people are great at video editing. Some people are good at writing blogs. Some people are good at project management or other things. I kind of want to do a general skills assessment just so we can utilize anyone who wants to help. So if you're interested in that, look out for that it'll be up before we get to next Wednesday's control camp. So that'll be something to look forward to. Okay, so today I'm very, very excited. We are talking about sonic branding, audio branding from some different names, audio logos, different names that you have heard. Some of your favorite companies have identifiers that are maybe a few notes long. Companies like McDonald's, Disney, Intel, Apple, Coca-Cola. Every time you turn on Netflix, there's a sound that greets you. These are created for these companies. There are composers or other musician types creating these, and we're all very curious as to how this comes together. Who creates these? What kind of budgets are available? What's up with this space? And so uh, this time we're going to get a chance to tap into two people who are very knowledgeable about this. Both have been on our stage before, but I'm very excited to have them in this capacity. We've got Mike Boris. Mike Boris is an award-winning music producer, music supervisor, and sonic strategist. Got his start working at advertising agencies as a music producer and then a music executive, and he's now the CEO of Jaded Melody, which is a music consultancy for brands. And we also have Steve Keller. Steve is the Sonic Strategy Director for Studio Resonate, which is an in-house audio-first creative consultancy, which offers support to brands that advertise on XMM Media's platforms like Pandora, SiriusXM, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. Steve is recognized as one of the leading experts in the field of sonic strategy and identity. With a head for data and a heart for sonic expression, he actively engages in collaborative research projects, exploring the power of sound to shape our perceptions and influence our behavior. Mike and Steve, I'm so excited to have both of you here today.
Thank you, Eric. Steve, always nice to see you as well.
Yeah, I would love for it to be in person, but soon enough.
Soon enough.
And,
Yeah.
and thanks, Eric, for putting this together and giving us a chance to just kind of chat for a couple hours about what we love and what we're passionate about.
So it is really interesting. We tapped into this a little bit in a previous conversation with Mike was present, and we started talking about electric vehicles, and I'll save that because I want to get into that a little later. But that just sparked in me like how, little we know about that I know and other people in the room know about this field and this, so much going on here. So the ability to have both of you here to really kind of shine a light on this is really, really interesting to me. So let's just dive right in it. I want to jump right into kind of what Sonic strategy, what Sonic branding is, and then I'll double back and get to know a little bit more about each of you and your careers and how you got involved in this area. But let's just get into Sonic branding. I have some questions, but this will be a discussion, so feel free. I know both of you are very comfortable speaking on this subject, and so we can ping back and forth. You can feed off of my questions. You can feel free to take it in a totally different direction. We're just sitting around the campfire having a chat in front of a few folks. So from both of your bios, like it's you can tell like there's this intersection between science, sound, and psychology. Like this is kind of where we are, and companies are very interested in this intersection. So just let's start this off with number one. Why are companies interested in this? Why is this even a significant area? Where is the big interest in science, sound, psychology in that intersection? Where is that from for either one of you?
I think if it's the intersection of science, I'm going to let Steve lead on this first question.
Well, that's so nice of you, Mike, because I was going to suggest maybe you start and kind of talk about the evolution from the ad agency perspective.
Oh, I could absolutely do that. I mean, this is
why start there.
Well, you know what? I'm going to talk more. This is something that I'm really passionate about, just because I know I look great and I sound young, but this is my third decade working in this business, and in a nutshell, we're kind of what you hinted towards is sonic logos, sonic identity, which is, as we all know, similar to a company's visual logo and everything else you see about them. This is the sonic representation, and it's very important. I like to think it started with, back with the Wheaties jingle, the first jingle ever done. That's kind of like the evolution of sonic branding. Back then, they reached consumers via radio, so that's the way to reach them with a consistent sound. It evolved into jingles, and then, as I like to look at it, as the consumer touch points have evolved, which is what happens because with a strategy, we can talk about the specific logos and how you get there and the creative process and collaboration, which is essential with the brand. They've always spoken it to the consumer touch points. So when it was just radio and then TV, jingles were big. Underscores with a melodic theme that were used were fantastic. What is it? I'm sorry. Is it, what's the insurance company that's Nationwide? Nationwide was a jingle that ran for 30 years, and back then they would do a sung tag, so they could do an underscore at the front, whatever music needed to support that creative, and then we'd have a sung tag. That's kind of like the birth of the mnemonic. Of course, then, Intel is a benchmark with mnemonics. That came out. Our good friend Walter Rosa did that in the 90s, and because Intel was also paying a portion of the advertising media time, with that right came with that paycheck came the right to use their audio logo on everything, so they could sponsor the last. I used to know exactly. I think it's 3.5 seconds. I actually I inherited that and worked on Intel for about 3 years at McCann. And it was the ultimate, I guess you would call it a consistent mnemonic. Because like McDonald's is a transportable, what I call a transportable mnemonic. It's a theme that can be arranged in different musical styles and different applications. Whereas Intel, it's sonically the same everywhere it goes. And they have rules and regulations so people can't fuck with it, because being consistent is also a big part of being a mnemonic. But anyway, then fast forward to the internet and social media. 6-second became is the big place to communicate now. So things need to work there. And of course, the event of smart speakers, and there's so many ways media has been fractionized. It still needs to be communicated properly. And a good sonic strategy goes beyond, just the sound logo. I think I'm actually skipping over quite a bit of sonic branding history. But a good sonic logo is not just the logo. It's a strategy for the whole brand to reach people at every consumer touch point. I guess a very good example of who's doing it very well right now is MasterCard. They came out with a sonic logo, a sonic strategy. They're using it as functional sounds. So at point of purchase, you swipe, you hear their logo. They're using it as a theme, a sonic logo for the end of their spots. They're incorporating it as a melodic theme through all of their scoring. They're building libraries. So people doing sales videos at all their different vendors have plenty of material to use it, so they're consistent throughout the whole world. So I guess that's my dyslexic history of music and sonic branding in 3 minutes.
That is great. And also, Steve, I know you wanted to piggyback on that.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. For it's tough to condense the history into a small amount of time, and we could talk for hours just about that. A couple of things I would pull out is that I think the essence of sonic branding, at least the low hanging fruit, is thinking about how sound is a memory device, and that's ancient. I mean, back before our ancestors could write down the history of the tribes we were a part of, they would sing these histories. They would chant these histories because it was a lot easier to remember setting something to a melody. And we still do that as kids. How do we learn our ABCs? Well, with the Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, with the ABCs sung to that tune. And so we have a way of attaching sound to moments in time that we remember. You think of the soundtrack of your life, and sounds as kids that take you back there, the sound of the music that prompted that first kiss, or maybe that song we listened to over and over again at a breakup. And so all brands have done is really quite naturally gravitated towards using sound and music as a mnemonic device. Mike talked about Wheaties. We can certainly see in the early days of advertising, particularly on television and radio, the power of using music and sound, particularly when there were variety shows. You look at the Texaco variety show and the introduction there. A lot of folks don't know that the Grand Ole Opry actually was birthed from an insurance company that had a slogan, "We shield millions," and they bought a radio station. Country station that was so powerful that you could tune it in Europe on a clear night. But WSM radio, biggest country radio station in the world, we shield millions. That's what WSM stands for. So brands have been using music and sound to connect, to create memories. But I think where it's gotten more sophisticated was probably in the late 90s, early 2000s, as design companies started thinking beyond visual design and started thinking about the application of design principles to audio. Meta Design in Germany was one of the first companies that started a sonic branding division. And this is within a design company. So they weren't launched as a sonic branding company. It was just folks within a design company. And eventually they would kind of break off and form their own companies. And so, you have some of these early adopters, Elias Arts, Daniel Jackson with his company was Chord. Now he's got Sonic Brand. And these companies were designed to start thinking less about music in terms of composition or just a jingle, and more about how do you bring design elements and design thinking to the process. And that brought a certain rigor. You started looking at understanding brands, doing assessments, digging into brand equity studies, trying to think about how you would translate brand attributes, brand values, brand personality into a sonic language. And eventually, that started giving rise to the ability to do more and more testing, which was where I started to see a real shift as we got into more companies beginning to pop up that were specializing in audio testing, both quantitatively and qualitatively, looking at implicit and explicit testing, where we could test the development of sonic identities and how well they were working with consumers even before they were launched. And this gradually led even more into understanding the psychology of sound, psychoacoustics, cross-modal science, where we look at the way our senses play into our perception of the world around us. And that all factored into the design process. And I think just bringing it into today's world, as Mike mentioned, I think what I've seen in the last 3 years, and quite honestly in the last year in particular, we've seen people moving away from screens, leaning into auditory experiences. We've seen the rise of social audio platforms like Clubhouse, and then we see Spotify Green Room and Twitter Spaces, and we now see that Meta, formerly Facebook, doing the same thing. And brands started to realize very quickly that they needed to be able to show up in this space where you couldn't see them and differentiate themselves by their sound. So that's made these conversations much more salient for brands at this point, given guys like Mike and I opportunities to begin engaging in conversation. And the one last point I'll make before I move off the topic is the evolution of seeing sonic identity being defined less and less by singular distinctive audio assets like a sonic logo or a jingle or a brand theme, and defined more as a system of sound in very much the same way that you think of a visual identity system. You can think of a sonic identity system. So what goes into a visual identity? Well, usually there's specific colors, there's a brand mark. That brand mark may be translated in 4 colors, or it may be a grayscale version where you're going to see it in black and white. There may be a typography that's involved with it. There are particular ways in which all of these elements work together and are combined and are locked up or taken apart. And sonic identity is involved to the point where sonic identities really are The whole is other than the sum of the parts. So it could be UX UI sounds, it could be a sonic logo, it could be a brand theme, it could be a brand voice. And you look at ways to optimize the combinations of all of these things. They need to work together as a sound set. They need to be able to work separately. They need to be able to be built in a way that they can be flexible and adaptable and ownable. And that means more and more that brands have to have a strategy for how they use these assets, how they're going to be consistent with them, how they're going to communicate them to all of their brand partners. And so it's gotten quite sophisticated, and particularly in the last few years. So that's me doing the best I can to throw a bunch of stuff into one.
Yeah,
No,
one
that is.
thing
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
I was just going to say, one thing of all those nuggets that Steve just talked about, because I know a lot of people in the room are composers and songwriters. Everything Steve just mentioned means that a client or a brand needs to buy into this work, and it's a lot of work, and it needs to be done right, and there needs to be a lot of cooperation and a buy-in from all the stakeholders involved to get all the information you need. Stereotypically, music production is much more executional. So that's what's joyous for me working in this space is you really get to roll up your sleeves and have a point of view and do some work. By executional, if you don't know, a traditional music company gets hired by an agency and they do competitive demos, and you've got a room full of people going yay, yay, nay, usually probably getting you involved a little later in the creative space that you would like. And you're going through a reverse funnel. At the top of the funnel will be maybe a creative director who's my age with a brand that's talking to millennials. So it's a little frustrating for somebody who enjoys working in production. But in the whole world of sonic branding and sonic strategy, you need to get a buy-in from your stakeholders early on and talk through the whole creative process. So that's a big part of it that I enjoy working on in terms of that aspect.
That was really helpful, especially to hear, and I want to go a little more into that too, in terms of hearing how, from a composer perspective, what this looks like. But even um, before that, can we bring this even more practical? I guess as I know a lot of the work sometimes you guys do, especially if it's for a client, you can't talk too many details about it. But from a sonic from a sonic brand, is there an example of a company that needed a sonic brand, either that you were involved with or a generally known case study? Can we talk through to the room how a company ended up with the logo that they now have, what that process looked like?
Sure, I can give you an overview of the process that's not really proprietary. In some ways, it's developed again according to basic design principles. So there's two approaches. One is this methodological approach that I'm going to talk about. That said, there's also sometimes, before we've kind of evolved to this point, the way in which something may just have been approached as a music execution and wound up being a sonic logo. To give you an example of that would be the Coca-Cola logo prior to 2016 when they changed it. But that logo was basically the tail end of a motif that Coke had commissioned a song for Happiness Factory. Some of you may remember the commercial. It's quite old now, but somebody dropped a quarter into a vending machine, and you kind of went into this fanciful world, and they just had a score underneath it. Da 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 da, ba da ba da ba da ba 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 ba. And so there was a music company, Human, that composed that piece of music, and eventually, ba 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 ba, those five notes from that motif were broken off. They became the Sonic logo, and Coca-Cola used it in a lot of different contexts. They were actually quite famous for getting artists to include it in pieces of music. Probably one of the more famous examples being Somalian artist Kanan, had a song called Wave and Flag. That song was rising up on the charts and quite popular, and Coke approached Kanan about doing a remix and including their longer theme in Wave and Flag. And if you have heard the World Cup version of Kanan's Wave and Flag, it starts with a chant at the beginning, and you hear the chant, whoa, 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 whoa. And it rose up the charts and became the anthem of the World Cup as a song, and it had Coca-Cola's theme in it. So there are those stories of how a sonic property may have developed out of an existing property that wasn't exactly designed to do that to begin with. But if you're going to be more intentional, here's the parts of the process. I'll just try and lay them out as quickly as possible. As I said, it really does follow design principles. So it begins with a period of assessment. So when I'm working with a brand and we're doing assessments, this part of the process can take anywhere from a month to 2 or 3 months, depending on the size of the brand. But you're doing a series of discovery interviews. You're talking to folks about the brand, trying to understand what their perceptions of the brand is. You look at consumer studies to see what are consumers' perceptions of the brand. You're digging into collateral that the brand may share with you in terms of maybe some competitive research they've done, brand equity studies, which are kind of designed to help you understand to what extent people recognize the brand and how the brand sits in the market. And then we also do a series of audits that are a part of this assessment. We'll take a look at who are the biggest competitors for the brand in this space, and take a look at how are these competitors using sound. Do they have their own audio logos? Are there things consistently about their use of sound that might give you an idea of how it sits in the market? We'll do a historical audit with the brand where we'll take a look at how the brand has used sound in the past, how it's using sound now. Sometimes in those audits, you uncover sonic properties that the brand is using that could actually be part of the identity. To give you an example of kind of an interesting case there was when I was working for Ritter Sport, which is a German chocolate brand. We have it here in the States too. It's a square brand. And as we were doing the audits, one of the things that we noticed from very early on in really old commercials through to the present was they made a big deal about the fact that they had this special packaging called a Nick pack. And you would open it not by tearing the wrapper, but by turning the chocolate on its back and actually cracking the chocolate in half, and it opened this pack. And you could eat the chocolate and then put it back in the pack. It's kind of served as a pouch. And so there was this, snapping and this crack within the commercials that was ever present, but we noticed it kind of sounded different from age to age. And we started asking them questions about, where did the sound come from? And they're like, well, sound designers used a stick or a carrot or something like that to make the sound. And we said, well, here's an opportunity where people could actually hear the sound of your brand, and you're losing that. So one of the outcomes of that particular part of the audit was, when I came back from Germany to the office in Nashville, they were always happy to see me when we were working on Ritter Sport, because I would come back with pounds of chocolate. And we went into the studio and we actually, mic'd up and created a whole sound effects library of the chocolate. Eating it, biting into it, cracking it open, and it became a sound effects library that Ritter Sport would provide to all of the audio companies around the world that were working with their products. So now they had a consistent representation of their product. So that's what happens in that audit. And then we'll do a contextual audit, which gives us the landscape, sonic ecosystem of the brand, where sound is kind of connecting with consumers. A lot of times you look at retail spaces, telephony, what's on hold, UX and UI for like kiosks or card readers. Maybe the product itself is making a sound, as it did in the case of Ritter Sport. Looking at interactivity as we're getting more and more into voice interactive areas. And then, as we get into the metaverse where sound might show up there. And all of that is synthesized into a readout and a report that gives the brand an assessment of here's where you are sonically. So this is kind of the starting point. So, we haven't even thought about sound. We've spent all this time just learning about the brand. And the next phase is what I call a sonic profiling phase. For me and my process, usually what we're doing is a series of workshops where we dive into working with the brand and their agencies to really hone in on what are the brand attributes, what are cross-modal associations with the brand. That's an exercise where usually we talk about, when you think about the brand, what do you see? If there's a taste involved, what do you taste? And eventually that leads to the question, what do you hear? And then what we do in this exercise is attempt to find places of congruency between what a brand looks like and what a brand sounds like, and maybe what a brand tastes like, what a brand smells like, because sound doesn't happen in a vacuum. And we want to understand sound in the context of other sensory elements. And then we do some work around audio archetypes. I worked with Daniel Muhlensiefen from the Music, Mind, and Brain program at Goldsmiths University in London a few years ago. And we kind of dove into this idea that maybe music didn't just communicate emotion, it communicated meaning. And we could kind of talk about music in terms of semiotics. And so we did some research and found that there does seem to be something to this idea of the existence of sonic semiotics. And so part of our process in profiling is working with brands to kind of uncover what are their audio archetypes. That gives us a framework for how we think about emotions. Because a lot of brand briefs, as a composer, you guys have seen this, where a brief will come back and say, we want it to sound happy or confident or relaxed. And that can mean any number of things. But if you start thinking about what's happy to a jester versus happy to a rebel versus happy to a caregiver, that starts to create a whole framework. And so we go through this profiling system that starts to help us think about how we might describe the sound of the brand. And then we get into an audio mood workshop where we'll start pulling pieces of music and sound together and then conduct a workshop where we listen and talk about what we're hearing, what makes it sound on brand, what sounds off brand. And this workshop's designed to not only tease out what might become a sonic palette for the brand, but it's also a way to start training clients and agencies to develop a language to talk about sound. So that when we get to evaluating the sonic properties we ultimately create, there's kind of a standardized way of evaluating those that's designed to try and pull out personal preferences, so they're not just responding to whether or not they like a piece of music. They're really able to kind of pull it apart.
Steve,
So,
so
yeah.
much of what you're saying is so fascinating. I can imagine for people in the room who this is their first time hearing this, that this is also like mind blowing, because when most people think about an audio logo or an audio brand, they think, McDonald's. They think da 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 da, or they think, or the Intel sound. So you're talking three, four, five notes. And so to hear the process you're describing to get to three, four, or five notes just sounds incredible if you've never thought about that. Because in some ways, if you're just approaching this, it kind of seems like maybe these notes just came out at random. Somebody sat at a keyboard, plucked out a series of three, four, or five notes and said, "You like that? No? Okay. How about this? You like that? You like that?" But for you to tie all the other senses together, for you to say, okay, with this brand, you make widgets. When people look at your widgets, what are they thinking? How do they feel? What colors do they see? And what are they hearing? Are they in the fields, or are they hearing wind, or are they on the sea? So are they hearing wave? Like, to actually to see that all that process goes into coming up with three, four, or five notes is probably hard to take in if you've never considered that is what it takes. And so for your clients, is this an accepted process in the industry, or are you selling people? Do you have to educate them that, hey, if you want to get, something that fits you, you have to go through these steps? Because I could see some people thinking like, oh, I just need notes. Give me some notes, and then that's it.
Yeah, well, Mike can attest to this, that, the reality is a lot of what we do is education. I think selling the process, quote unquote, selling the process has gotten easier because I do think brands understand that, we could talk about it in terms of five notes. And look, to be fair, part of this is just Pavlovian. So, you could quite easily sit down, come up with five notes, and if you've got enough money for a media buy, pound that into the ground and have people think about it. Certainly, Coca-Cola that I described didn't go through this process then, but they do it now, because part of what you come to understand with this process is that when you realize your sonic identity isn't just those five notes. So you have to think much bigger than that. And the only way to do that is thinking about design. But yes, what's really tough in this work is that for so long, to Mike's point, talking about the process earlier, brands have been in the habit of, just a tactical approach to sound. And very often at the end of a process, oh, we've got a script, I guess we need a voiceover. Oh, we've got a campaign, I guess I need a piece of music underneath. So trying to get brands to move away from this kind of tactical thinking and begin thinking more about strategy, is definitely an education. And when you talk to some brands who think, hey, let me just hire a bunch of composers like I usually do for music and get a bunch of demos back and throw them against the wall, and why can't that take 3 weeks? When you start talking about a process that's months, if not, potentially a year or longer, depending on the brand. I mean, with a large global brand, you have to start factoring in, how this identity is going to translate across cultures. And that's why before you even get to the first note, you do all of this work. But I will say this about the process is once you've gone through the assessment and the profiling, and then you get to prototyping, where now you're creating a brief, and the brief that you have isn't a one-page brief for a piece of music. It's it outlines everything from a sonic manifesto into how you'd interpret attributes, into tonalities, into tempos, harmony. Everything is pretty defined. But then composers have ability to kind of take that really refined brief and bring their own twist to it, their own composition to it. A lot of times when you're building a sonic identity, you'll start thinking about other symbols that you can bring into the process. And I'll say this, one of the best companies, I think, in the world that does a really interesting way of connecting these dots of symbols and sound is a company called Why Do Birds in Germany. And Alexander Woodruck, who's a friend of mine, just really talented and a lovely person too. But if you go to whydobirds.de, because it's a German company, and look at their audio branding case studies, you will see, to me, what are some examples of best in class thinking that move beyond, oh, I'm coming up with 5 notes, into, what's the essence of this brand, and how do we, do interesting things like turning their typography into a sonic language, building a program where you're generating synth patches based on data that you're getting from the company. So it's not just about the sound, you're literally infusing the DNA of the brand into the sound. So to your point, Eric, it does take some education, and that's ongoing, but I'm finding less and less friction around that. And Mike, I've been talking a long time, so I'm going to just shut up so you can jump in here and
Oh, great listening to you, Steve. I've done that, Eric. I've been in rooms, because I spent years on staff at an agency where we've tried that approach. And when you take, I don't know, these 3 notes sound cool, this little melody sounds cool, and you put 5, 10, 30, 40, 3, 5, 6 note little bleeps, blaps, and bloops in front of a bunch of creatives, they get glassy-eyed and confused very quickly. It really needs to be quantified, and it needs to have some commonality behind it, something that makes sense to connect it to the brand. That's also part of the buy-in of the creative process. And I can actually talk about something I just worked on, and this is a much scrappier approach, but it really encompassed a lot of what Steve said. A lot of the sonic branding companies use the same workflow, just with a very budget conscious client that I had to work with what I had. But it's a pharmaceutical tag for a drug called Onureg. They had all their brand attributes for us. They had a really nice document. So we were able to take that and then, very, very much kind of curtailing what Steve said, condensing that approach. Did a competitive audit, listened and checked out what all their other competing brands in this space were doing, see who was using music, who wasn't. Most of the brands in this case were not, but hearing what other people do, gives you an idea of where you can find some white space for your brand. I mean, maybe somebody's, licensing songs. Somebody's using really bad, inexpensive stock music that doesn't have a lot of thought behind it. So you find out where the space is. The key thing where Steve is talking about the archetypes, which is an absolute brilliant way to do that, and I suggest everybody Google a little bit for Steve and his archetypes, and it's fascinating how that's approached. And I remember when Steve was doing his initial research for it and being a bug on the wall, now it's happening. It's great. But it comes down to taking all this information and getting, I call it an audio mood board. It's getting a bunch of temp tracks, could be stuff from composers, could be soundtracks from movies, could be songs, and take the words people are saying, like, champion, empowered, inspirational, and playing things. Because, I mean, Jesus, inspirational can be Chariots of Fire. It could be Kanye. What is inspirational to you? You play a few things. And the challenge for me is to then shut up and listen and see what everybody says and try to ask some not leading questions. You learn a lot of that information. You learn what doesn't work. You learn what does work. And you're able to take all that information and then start crafting proper music demos, with a lot of forethought. So I think the process a lot of people use in this. But in the case of On Your Egg, that's what we did. We gave them about 30 tracks. We put them in different categories, and we extracted the information from them and then went straight to writing demos. And that is just engaging composers. Let's see, in this particular case, I brought on a friend of mine who's a talented composer to be a creative director. So he kind of helped me with the whole creative process and was my partner on the strategy aspect. And he went off and wrote on his own. And then we brought in 3 or 4 freelance composers. And from there on, it was just the regular workflow of creating music. I was very fortunate that those guys gravitated 2 or 3 in the first round, and we didn't have to go back and forth. But a lot of time, people are, to be honest, brands are paying a lot of money for this. So, sometimes they want you to work for it. You're doing a lot of work getting to the point of doing demos, but, they're going to want to hear a lot of different options. I like to, at this stage, because what I said before about playing 30 or 50 bleep, blaps, and bloops for a bunch of creatives, I like to kind of limit what I play and send them a very, very curated presentation. In this case, I took my favorite number of a lucky 13 and trimmed it down to that. And then, then we kind of went from there. All they wanted was a 4-second mnemonic. We tried to offer them up any and everything else, and they know they can come back to us, and we're happy to create that. But this was just a simple 4-second mnemonic.
How many notes fits into 4 seconds about?
In this case, 6.
Nice. Very insightful.
I'm always a big fan of making it, I love it when it's 1 syllable per name. So, On Your Egg, 3 syllables. So they ultimately didn't pick that. But that's kind of what I love to deliver. I stole that from my friend Michael Levine, who's a brilliant composer. He wrote the Kit Kat jingle years ago. And he does a lot of a lot of songwriting and composition, now mostly film and TV. But whenever he works on a brand, no matter what he's working on, he sneaks in the 1 note per syllable of the brand somewhere. It's almost like his hidden Mickey.
Yeah, that's a common trick. If you look at Walter Percival's Intel audio logo, which is actually 5 notes, but it starts with the bong, so we call it the Intel bong. But his inspiration came from Intel Inside. So think about that. You can almost sing it. Intel Inside. And so that's a common trick to play off of those syllables. Another trick is looking at logos. The T-Mobile audio logo. Ba-da-da-da-da. T-Mobile is actually a German company, Deutsche Telekom, and the original T-Mobile logo was 3 pink dots, a big T, and then 1 more pink dot. You kind of see it in different permutations today, but the inspiration for the T-Mobile 5 notes, we're actually looking at 3 dots, big T, little dot. Ba, 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 ba. So that was the kind of the symbolism that was behind that. And interestingly enough, a lot of the most sticky sonic logos are 5 notes. There's a sweet spot around 5 to 6 notes. Any less than that, and it's almost too easy to copy something else. Certainly, there's always exceptions. You think of the ba 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 for NBC's audio logo. Honda's tried to do a 2 note audio logo, but I would say Honda and Rocket Mortgage could easily get confused, and the old Avon doorbell, bong bong, could get confused with that. Any more than 6 notes, and it starts to get too complicated to remember. So it's just interesting that 5, 6 notes tends to be the sweet spot. And one other thing that I'll add about this process is that testing is quite often, especially for a larger brand, a part of the process. So you'll prototype, you'll come up with your demos, and then you'll test those. And what's really great about the process we've found is that the process works so well that when we get into testing, it's very rare that the 2, 3 at the most sonic properties that we test, it's very rare that they don't hit the mark. They usually all hit the mark because the process is so good at doing what it does. But invariably, there'll be one that'll be a little bit closer to the target. But at that point, now you've got 3 sonic identities that basically you could probably use any one of them, and they would work really well. You're just kind of leaning into the research to give you
This is great. I
I wanted
appreciate
to
you
ask
both.
Steve a quick question. Steve, so when you, in your experience, when you're down to a final 3 that have tested well, does it just become a visceral decision?
It can, and this is interesting for me, just, kind of being transparent about the process. I may have a favorite, but I do my best not to tip the hand as to what my favorite is as the clients are working through the process, because they need to own it. They need to make the decision. Usually, the one that wins in research is often one that everyone has gravitated towards. Occasionally, we'll find that, a couple of them are so close you could flip a coin, and then we'll kind of look at aesthetics. But, sometimes it boils down to you do have a favorite, and maybe in testing that favorite doesn't win, but it's tested well enough that hey, we use this over and over again. People are going to dig it. We feel better about it as a group, so let's factor that in. But at that point, the subjectivity has really been honed. So now you're using your gut, but it's an educated gut at that point. So I don't get too precious, and I like to say to my clients when we're using the science, I don't want to science the shit out of it to the point that it doesn't feel like there's inspiration or there's artistry or there's some surprise and magic. So the science and the data, should inform the process and be part of the magic. It's just kind of designed to help you bring a level of objectivity to something that can be so subjective that without guidance, as Mike said, you're just throwing things against the wall and giving thumbs up and thumbs down, and depending on who's in the room, you can get a horrible read. I was working with a brand once, and one of the values was confidence. And so we were going through the mood exercise, and they were gravitating towards a lot of tracks that had a real heavy rhythm, maybe a little approaching the rock genre. And at one point in the discussion, I stopped the group and I said, "It's interesting to see how what you're interpreting as being confidence. Is there anything that you notice in the room in this process. And it took them a while, but finally somebody in the table said, we're all just a bunch of white guys. And I said, do you think we should have a little bit more diversity with voices in this process? And they said, yeah. So we shut the process down. They diversified the group, brought in a more diverse group, particularly with adding a number of women to the group. We were doing the exercise again, and they landed on confidence that was much better for the brand, that wasn't being driven by their personal preferences. So, those are the things that you just.
There you go. That goes back to the reverse funnel I was talking about earlier. It funnels up to the top, and you need the right decision makers there, not just one or one point of view.
It's so cool. It's actually also cool to hear the balance between the analytical process and the creative process. And I think that it's clear. I love how you explain why it's necessary. Like if it's all creative, one, you end up with a ton of options that that aren't grounded, and just making a decision becomes really challenging. But having the balance between, the companies already have their brand attributes, so they know, kind of who they are, so they're able to put some context for a composer, and then a composer can use that to then apply that creativity. I think that's the same as in other areas of sync, where those of us who like writing to brief, it's one of the reasons why, because then we're not just throwing random darts at a wall. You have a song reference, you have, a context, you have things to shoot for, and and you can apply it's easy to be creative within some range of limitations, as opposed to nobody really wants a blank canvas when there's a client involved. You got to have some direction, some limitations, some constraints. So it's cool hearing that.
I was going to say, a lot of you guys who are composers, if you get brought in to work on a sonic branding gig, you might not get this peek behind the curtain. You might get a very concise brief that comes from all this. So it might be nice now that you know where it's coming from. But that's very much on purpose, because with all this research, and we've done our archetypes and mood boards, we know that we need to bring back a certain amount of point of views, and you might be just given that execution. So don't feel slighted.
That's some awesome insight. Okay, let me take a quick break to just do a reset of the room. It's 9:07. We've been a little over an hour. This is Control Camp. We're a community all centered around sync licensing, so music for all aspects of video, whether it's ads, television, games, brands, etc. Today we're doing a chat with Mike Boris and Steve Keller, who are giving us an introduction into sonic branding, coming up with the audio logos you hear in a lot of your favorite companies. It's been a really insightful discussion thus far for the creatives in the room. If you do have questions, I am going to, for the second half, can bring some people up if you have questions. So I'm going to turn hand raising on. I also will accept questions in the back channel. So if you don't want to raise your hand, you can also just message in the back channel, and we'll do questions that way. But we'll continue with our discussion. If you want to know more about us, you can come look up Control Camp, follow the club at the top, and controlcamp.com. You can get more information about us. And make sure you're following us to get access to the after party that happens right after this room at 10 p.m. Eastern. That is for Control Camp members only. All right, we got Mo on stage. How you doing, Mo? You got a question?
I do. Hi. And I have my question is for Steve, and I don't know if you can talk about it, but I would love you to tell the story of the Trojan.
Oh, yeah, that's a throwback. Yeah, hi Mo. It's lovely to hear your voice. It's been a while. Yeah, I'll make this short. This isn't so much a sonic identity story as much as it is just a commercial story. But I was approached. Trojan was working on a new campaign. They had been through the ringer with a few different music houses, and hadn't really landed on anything that they liked. Somebody gave me a call and said, "Hey, here's an opportunity, but I got to have something in 24 hours. Can you turn it around?" So I looked at the commercial, and it was a room full of pigs in a bar talking to women, and one of the pigs kind of gets up, walks into the restroom, and there's a condom dispenser, and they use their little hoof, turn the key, the Trojan condom walks out or drops into their hoof, and as they walk out of the bathroom, they've turned into a sexy young man who then sits down at the bar and chats up a smiling woman at that point. So the idea was being, don't be a peg, use condoms. And so I just kind of took that theme, and the idea hit me of when pigs fly. So here was an idea of doing something and getting to your goal, and having Trojan condoms be a part of that. So I threw it together. I wrote it for a female vocal to sing. I thought it would be much more effective that way. So I brought in just a great singer in Nashville. In the session, we put the vocal down, and I was wrapping up at the end of the night, and I thought, well, maybe they'd want to hear a male vocal, and I didn't have time to call anybody, so I just hopped in the booth and sang it myself. I'm not a vocalist, but I thought, okay, this will be good enough for them to get the idea. So we sent it off, and the next day I got a call and said, hey, we really like this. I'm like, that's awesome. And then they said, we're wondering if the vocalist might be open to doing some voiceovers too, because we really like the take on this. We like the vocal. And so we're thinking, maybe we'll do some voiceovers with the vocal. And I said, sure, I'm sure that wouldn't be a problem. She's done VO work before, so I know she'll do it. And they said, no, we're talking about the guy. And I said, well, that's me, and you don't want to use me. If you like a male vocal, let me get somebody in here that can really sing that. And they said, no, there was something about it that we really liked, and we want to use it. So, we finished it up, packaged it up, sent it off. All was good. We got paid. We were really happy. And then I had some meetings in London. So I was in London, and I called to check back on some things that were going on with my CD. And he said, dude, you were just on the O'Reilly Factor. I'm like, what? And they said, yeah, evidently they've banned the commercial on Fox and CBS. I said, what? And, I guess there was something weird with Fox and CBS at the time, that because the commercial wasn't directly about using condoms for health and safety, that it violated the principles. And so it became a story it was on the O'Reilly Factor. Stephen Colbert mentioned it one night. It was on VH1 program. It was in the New York Times. So that's kind of my claim to fame as a jingle singer, was singing about Trojan condoms and getting banned enough that they talked about me before social media was there to really blow it up. So
that is great.
That's the story.
I'm so glad Mo asked that. That is awesome. I had no idea. It's very cool. All right. Well, well, that's actually a good transition. And I do want to transition into asking both of you about your backgrounds and how you got to where you are. But real quick, this could be short. Just give us some context, because we were talking about audio branding, and you're talking about the compensation. What range of fees are we talking about? And I don't know if it may be all over the place, but can you give us some context in terms of some of what we're seeing, and at the maximum or the average? What are we talking about for the cost of these logos?
Well, could be all over. It's very much all over the place. I'm on the low side. To get tactical, 30 to 50 grand on the low side. For a big, huge worldwide brand, do a sound logo with a proper sonic strategy and building a whole bunch of assets in a library for people to use, it could be a 7-figure endeavor.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. What makes it difficult to price is, with if you think of the strategy piece and the profiling and everything that goes into that, like a normal consultancy would do, that's as simple as billable hours. You can kind of take a look at the size of the brand, kind of project how many hours are you going to spend on that. It's kind of not that difficult to figure out, studio time. It's not that difficult to kind of figure out what it would cost to produce the prototypes. All of that's fairly easy. Where it gets more complicated is in trying to determine the cost of the acquisition of the copyright. Because at the end of the day, the brand needs to own this. It's a mistake to license it for a number of reasons. But you're trying to figure the value of a copyright that hasn't been used without really knowing, what the media might be. And so you kind of have to take almost where the brand is, where you might project it being. I mean, if you're working on a sonic identity for a more of a local brand or even a regional brand, their media buy isn't going to be as large as a worldwide brand, where you start thinking about, okay, if I'm not collecting performance royalties on this, if I were going to license this, what would the licensing fee be? And look, let's face it, at the end of the day, the cost of a copyright is really a number you're pulling out of your ass to begin with, because it's really a projection. So that's where there's a lot of give and take, and why with a larger brand, if you say, well, look, worldwide buys, look at what you're spending on media now, this is going to be anywhere and everywhere, here's what we would value the acquisition of that copyright. And sometimes in that process, you can actually talk to the brand about, look, if you set up your own publishing company and you monetize this, you're going to offset costs because you're going to be able to collect royalties on it. Not only that, it's an intangible asset. So the more you use it, the more valuable it comes because you're building equity in it. And down the road, if it becomes an iconic property like an Intel bong, if Intel were to be evaluated tomorrow as a company because they were going to sell the company for some reason, one of the line items in that valuation would be the value of the Intel bong. And it would be millions of dollars. It would be way more than I know Walter ever was paid for that property, because it's increased in value because it's a distinctive audio asset now. So as a composer, you just have to do your best to decide, what's it going to be worth to you? How far do you think you can push the brand? And then make your peace with it, because maybe you don't get paid a lot and it turns into the next thing that you're hearing everywhere, and you're just going to have to accept the fact that that's what the cost was. But that's what makes it a difficult process to really price.
That's like the audio version of was it the Nike Swoosh that was bought for like $40 at the time. So you never know where it'll go.
Yeah, that of course is a negotiating tool as well. If money's tight, on the owner.
You're fading out a little bit, Mike.
Oh, I got a poor connection.
Oh, there you
Any
go.
better?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a negotiating tool, of course, on the composer side or the, sonic branding company side. If you can do an in perpetuity license, then of course there's, more back end. I wear different hats to make a living. Currently freelancing at an agency and inherited a sonic logo that a company did. And as I'm jumping in, I had to see what the brand owned and what they didn't. And I was surprised to see this is an in perpetuity license. I'm working for the brand. They're the ones paying me. I think I want them to own it. because, they're paying a lot of money and they have this equity and they should own it. If I'm on the other side, I, of course, will try to do an in perpetuity license, because then there'll be some, back end motivation for me or the people I'm working for. So, to be totally transparent.
That is great. I appreciate the insight. Okay, let's talk. So we've talked about Sonic branding, what it is, how a little bit of how it works. I think there's been a lot of insight. So for the people, let's talk about how you guys kind of got here. Mike, you kind of shared you were at advertising agency, so some of this work I think both in your past life and in your current life you kind of inherited. Is that, and then just kind of built on the experience as the nature of the work that you were doing at the agencies. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much. I started out as a recording engineer. And then when I saw Pro Tools going into laptops, I just decided that wasn't a viable career for me for the future, and I went over to an ad agency. I was at Ogilvy based in McCann for 10 years, and then, I've been doing that as a consultant for the last close to 10 years now. And most of my relationships are relationships that I built back when I was on the agency side, and derivative from that. People move on, and you've got a friend who likes to use you. You're working with another creative team, so I've kind of just been going with the flow as a consultant.
Very cool, very cool. And then so Steve, I looked at your background. You studied psychology in school, and you were also have a background in music production, remixing, composition. So it sounds like where you are now, like, is this ideal place where you're actually like you use your college degree and you're working in your passion. Like, was that intentional? Did it just align that way? Like, how did this fall into place?
Yeah, I mean, I think it eventually became intentional, but it kind of fell into place to begin with. I mean, I've loved music since I was a kid. I started learning piano at the age 6 and taught myself how to play the guitar and wrote songs in high school because it was a pretty effective dating tool. But I never thought about it as a career. So when I headed off to university, I was attracted to psychology. So I studied psychology, graduated with my degree in psych, and the plan was to go on, get my master's and my PhD. Uh, but music was always there, and there was not really an aha moment. I think I just gave myself permission to think about doing something different. And so I took a detour, and instead of heading to grad school, I headed to Nashville. Um, and got to Nashville and found that there were a lot of folks that could do a whole bunch of stuff a lot better than me. And there was one point where I almost threw in the towel, but I discovered I kind of had a knack for production. And in a weird twist of fate, in the early '90s, when country was so popular, people started going to dance clubs and doing these country line dances, and pretty soon the clubs started evolving into their own thing, and DJs started asking the Nashville labels for dance remixes, and the folks at the Nashville labels just scratched their heads. And I happened to be a guy who knew how to do a dance mix, so I was just in the right place at the right time, and started doing these remixes for every major label in town, and it was kind of my big break, working with a lot of artists like Tim McGraw and Neil Diamond and Leonard Skinner and Winona, and eventually, I started looking at commercials because I just thought that was interesting. I started writing music for commercials, and in the process of doing that, I found that I really just kind of loved advertising. I had a knack for copywriting and had written a bunch of copy for the website for the music company that I was working for at the time. And one of the advertising agencies called up the company owner and said, "Hey, I'm short a couple of copywriters, and I need somebody to do some freelancing. Who did the copy on your website? Because I really like it." So the guy said, "Well, the same guy that's done some music for you, that's Steve." And so the agency guy said, "Well, do you mind if I use him to freelance on some copy?" He said, "No, go right ahead." So I started writing copy, and eventually found that I just loved branding, and was ready for another pivot. And liked this idea of kind of looking at brand management, and very similar in some ways to artist management, but thinking about a brand. And it was around that time, this is probably about 2003, 2004, when an opportunity presented itself for me to start my own company. And as I was doing that, I was starting to read about sonic identity, particularly what was happening in Europe. And I was like, wow, this is a combination of all my passions: psychology and research, music and sound, advertising and branding. And so I decided to point the ship in that direction. Um, Felt like I would be better served by looking at the European market. So even though the company was based in Nashville, I really concentrated on Europe to begin with, and ultimately ended up opening an office in Frankfurt, Germany. And things really kind of took off for us around 2008, 2009. And as things grew there, I was able to kind of bring some of that learning back to the US market. The company started to evolve into less production. We were still doing production, but more into consultation and strategy. And that threw me right back into academia. I started meeting folks like Charles Spence from Oxford, Daniel Muhlency from the goldsmiths that I mentioned earlier. Started doing a lot of research in relationships between things like sound and taste, biases that come into musical selections, audio archetypes, music and sound used in healthcare settings. And so I started publishing in academic journals, which really helped with the credibility. And it was probably around 2017. I was at a conference speaking, and Lauren Nagel, who at the time was one of the creative directors for Pandora, was moderating a panel there. And we kind of hit it off. And I was reaching a point in my career where I was kind of like, all right, what's the next thing? For better or for worse, I tend to like to push the envelope, but once I've pushed it to a point where I can make money with it, I'm ready to move on to the next thing. So I was looking at what was the next thing for me, and Pandora started inviting me to do a number of events with them and then do some consulting with them. And one thing led to another, and it just seemed like a match made in heaven. So, the end of 2018, I decided to close my company. Pandora gave me enough runway so that I could finish up some projects and make sure that everybody who was working with me at the time had exit strategies and places where they could go. And then came on full time at Pandora as a Sonic Strategy Director. And that was right around the time Sirius XM purchased Pandora. And basically, I'm doing what I love with one foot in science, one foot in art, and I think my next pivot out of this at some point will probably be full on into academia and trying to teach other folks who are really interested in this work how to do it. So that's my story.
Okay. Go ahead, Mike. That was awesome. Oh, can't hear you, Mike.
You got me?
Yeah,
Test one,
got you.
two?
There you go.
Yeah. I still wear two hats and absolutely love it. I do a lot of music supervision. So anybody in this room, I'm always looking for songs, indie songwriters, production. So I still do a lot of that and have a real passion for it.
Awesome. Awesome. I see Liana has a question. Let her come up and ask it. Clubhouse might be slow. Oh, maybe she doesn't have a question. Liana, I saw your hand raised, but it's saying you don't have it raised. So, if back channel it, or if you did have a question. All right. So, Mike and Steve, both of your paths are very, very different to get here. So, what advice do you give to someone who's listening who is interested in getting in this space? Is it is it new? Are the career paths defined, or do you have to kind of make your own way? What's your advice to someone who's like, "Oh, this sounds interesting. How do I get involved?"
Um, I think there's no rules. You really need to do whatever you can to get a foot in the door. Any connections, any relationships. It's about meeting people. So, interning is great. Getting involved with a company. There's so many companies. Well, specifically for sonic branding, there's so many companies that are pretty big and doing a lot of work in that space. So, if you can get involved in that aspect, go for it. I mean, right away, follow Steve on every social media channel. That's a great way to get going and educate yourself. And between AMP and Guild of Music Supervisors and Googling just sonic branding companies, I mean, goodness, there's so many great ones. Just follow them all and see what work they're doing. Everything from Man-Made, Massive Music, of course, Steve's team at Pandora XM.
So these companies,
Sorry?
these companies, are they utilizing composers, musicians? What are the skill sets that they usually bring on?
Well, of course, they're different skill sets, but yeah, they absolutely use freelance composers. A lot of the European companies I'm finding have staff composers, and they kind of keep everything within that. Probably a lot of U.S. companies do too, but they're more apt to use freelancers. To get involved doing the music strategy, there's definitely a job as a music strategist. It's a hard place to get because usually that's somebody who's fairly senior. But if you can get involved somehow, as an intern or assistant, anything you can do to hack the system, go for it.
Yeah, and I'll add to that too. I think it's important that you know what your skill set is. If you've got some diverse elements of your background, that's great. If you have some understanding of marketing, that's great too. I think a lot of the sonic identities companies are evolving more to where they do kind of operate in a model where you may have composers or creative directors, strategists. You may have sound designers. I'm looking down in the audience and seeing folks like Shez and Sean, who may tap different talent from time to time. And I think, as with anything in this industry, it's all about relationships. So be curious, reach out, ask questions, look for opportunities, and just adapt, because I think that's what excites me about this work, is that it opens up a whole class of individuals who have a passion for music and sound, but may not be musicians or composers themselves. So it gives them an opportunity to use their education or their background in really unique ways. So I think, as Mike said, get educated, learn as much as you can about it. There is a language that's involved. The better you can speak the language, the more you will, connect with folks that are doing this work. And then, just try and make yourself.
That's a good point. The end user in this process is usually not a musician, or that's not what they need to be. The end user and decision maker is going to be, a brand manager or a CMO. So there needs to be people in the process to liaison all that information properly.
This is really, really great. I appreciate that. Uh, Chitra, did I pronounce your name right? I know you have a question.
Yes, Chithra. Thanks, Eric. Nice to meet you, Mike and Steve. I love this topic. I think it's amazing because, as someone who creates voice skills myself, I think that sonic branding is really reachable at this point for everyone to start getting involved with voice. So it's a great way for someone to start branding, whether you're a small company or a large company. And I often get questions because I typically work with larger companies and celebrities, but I get questions also from small businesses who want to do sonic branding for their business and brand it further. And they don't know what options are available to them. And I'm curious if either of you have any insight on what would be good resources for someone who may have a personal brand and just wants to make sure that they're, getting ready for the big boom.
Other than calling me,
Do you work with small brands?
oh
Or
yeah,
what about like individual podcasters or people who might, there's so many people who have smaller brands now that,
yeah. I
logo.
kind of sure. I purposely have keep myself scaled down to basically a consultancy of one, so I can take on small jobs, and I partner with a team that makes sense to do whatever I need to do. So I enjoy working with small brands. But other than that, there's a lot of resources out there. Are you specifically looking for ideas or advice or guidance for small brands?
I mean, I get approached by some small brands who are looking, and I think they've faced difficulty because they're often told that they have to develop a sonic identity, and it's not, they have to have like, various parts to their sonic identity, and then they get overwhelmed. And I'm just interested in learning about, if there's other options for people like that. But it seems like you're one of them, so that's good to know going
Yeah,
forward.
yeah. There's other solutions besides, if money's tight. There's music that can be found and licensed. It might be not be 100% exclusive, but it could be ownable to them for what they need to use it for.
Yeah, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
there's a lot of solutions out there. I always say with limitations, there is creativity. So I'm happy to help you as a buddy favor, just because I love talking about this subject, or if you need more help, I'm happy to do that as well.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I think, as much as I talk about the importance of the process, it's also important to kind of meet people where they are, and particularly with small brands where they may not have the resources. You can still apply some of these design principles. I mean, Mike said that earlier. In the case study of the brand that he was working with. You can find out some things about the brand. You can think about how could we translate that into a sonic language, and you can come up with some kind of a brief that you can engage a composer to come up with some ideas. And again, if you find something that has a melody, that has a little bit of a hook, that can be remembered, that's enough of a sonic property that if you're consistent in the application of it, it becomes a brand. And podcasts, I mean, some of them have sonic brands in their own right. First of all, the voice of the podcaster is probably part of that identity. Sometimes there's theme music that's developed that becomes part of that identity. And so, I think sometimes there may even be properties that are already in use. I often say, when I talk about sonic identity, I say, it doesn't start with your ears, it starts with what's between them. And I think sometimes, if you start the process by just listening to the brand as it is, maybe there's something there to draw from. It's not always about imposing sound on a brand. And the other thing that I'll say is that, I think the work that you are doing is particularly important. Those of you who know me or have heard me in other rooms, another one of my passions is around the idea of sonic diversity, and thinking about how voice is another one of the potential distinctive assets that a brand can use. And so what is voice communicate. And, if diversity is important for your brand, how are you communicating that diversity in your sound and in your brand voice? And that's a whole other topic that's beyond sonic identity. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity in the world of voice AI, voice technology. There are companies that are beginning to develop AI voices that can be owned by a brand. That's an AI voice that you wouldn't hear anywhere else. There are companies like Rupa Patel's Voice ID company, where she actually works with individuals who uh, aren't able to speak, that are using text to speech programs, and doing some really, I think, just from a purpose standpoint, just good work around how do we give these people a voice that's their own voice, that's not a borrowed voice or that sounds like somebody else's voice. I think there's a whole other world of discussions around that. But, we've been focused on music in this discussion, but voice is an aspect of identity too, and one that's often not thought about when we're thinking about sonic.
And also, just simple,
You backed away again, Mike.
Am I disappearing?
Yeah, now
Am
you're
I
there.
back?
Yeah, you're back.
There we go. Oh, I got some funky signal here. It's the Jersey water. It fucks up the signal. All right. Bergen County?
Yep.
Where are you?
In Tenafly.
I'm in River Edge.
We're neighbors. Okay, cool.
All right. We got to meet for coffee at the Bergen Mall.
Sure.
If you're doing, if something as simple as a podcast, I don't mean to say a podcast is simple, but finding some good music, working with the composer, finding some library music, just some very common sense things. Have a composer leave you a toolkit, basically stems of the tracks, maybe make a 3-second, a 6-second, nice versions that you could use that sound good or consistent. Keep something consistent under the intro. Have the equivalent of what they do in TV shows for a bumper when they go to the break, something for the ending. I think just the consistency of something that everybody likes is one step in the right direction.
Very cool. Chitra, thank you so much. What a great question.
Thank you to all.
Okay, we've got just about less than 10 minutes. Adam had a question. We probably got time for one or two more questions. So if you have a question, put your hand up now, and then we're going to wrap up. What's going on, Adam?
Yeah, long time no speak, Eric. How you doing? What's going on?
Doing good, doing good.
Yeah, I won't be too long because I have a very direct and simple question, and maybe someone else can get a question after me. Mike, what's going on? I talked to you in Ryan's room that doesn't exist anymore. That was always a good time. So thanks for kind of being around there. And Steve as well. I'm just wondering, is there any sort of conferences or events in person that you guys like to go to every year, or some things that really helped you gauge more connections? Because I'm really trying to work on that for, I guess, now in 2022. I think that's pretty important, especially being up in Canada, going to some of these events in the States and networking with different individuals.
There used to be, there still is, every year, but it's international. There were three individuals based in Germany that started the Audio Branding Academy. Now I think it's the International Sound Academy. But if you Google Audio Branding Academy, you'll find them. It's a great collection of practitioners in this space, and they do events from time to time. So that's a good place to meet folks. I'm finding more and more that a lot of times in advertising conferences, there's some specific things around sound and identity that are popping up more and more. Quite honestly, I kind of have my ear to the ground with a lot of academic conferences because I think some of the most interesting potential insights are coming out of some of these academic conferences where they're not even thinking about the commercial applications of it. They're just, folks who are fascinated with the psychology and the perception and the impact of sound. But what I've noticed lately is that some of these academic practitioners are getting more involved in consulting for brands, particularly on the sensory side of things. So, as Mike said, it's just kind of like finding folks like Mike and I that are out there. Folks like Shez and Sean, who are down in the audience. Lavender has a book out that's just a wonderful little book about science and application of sound in the healing professions. So check that out. But
I see Al Reese's got a great company called Groove Guild that
Groove Guild
does a lot of everything.
Yeah. So it's just networking, following folks, and don't be afraid to reach out to us or anybody with questions. And I do that all the time. I'm continually networking that way, and that's how I keep learning.
And I'm definitely heading to South by this year, hoping it's going to be what it was, and I'm going to go early for the brand portion. That happens on the weekend where there's a lot of brands there. So if you go, come on down, man. We'll grab a few tacos and a beer and walk around and try and network with some people.
Is the audio branding / sync event somebody kind of brief? I think it was Daraj and the other folks who said that happens the week before South by, or is there? I know that's a whole other loaded question, but is that technically usually the week before? I know South by starts on the Friday, so would that be leading up to that, or would that be the first weekend is when that stuff sort of happens?
Hopefully they still have it, but usually the weekend before. So the music festival usually starts like on Tuesday night of that week, and over the weekend is when brands are there. I'm not sure how digital focused or what their branding that is this year.
Nice. I'll call them. I'll ask them. They have a hotline. So. But thank you, though.
Thank you, Adam. Good question. All right. So last thing before we wrap up, you guys just kind of alluded to like all these other new things happening within sonic branding, and the one discussion that Mike was a part of, I guess a few months back, we were talking about electric vehicles and how it's, law now where, electric vehicles need to design a sound for their engines because, they're practically silent. And so they have to some have hired composers to come up with some new engine sound that actually serves as a car brand identity, but also, handles the safety issues. So just curious what other things you guys are seeing on either on the radar or trends or things interesting, anything interesting happening in the sonic branding identity space that we should be aware of.
I mentioned voice earlier. I think voice technology it's fascinating. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I do think that brands are leaning more into experiences. We're kind of in this experience economy. So experientially, how are brands showing up? I have a feeling that, while it's a bit of a buzzword right now, the metaverse will be a whole other sonic sphere. And I do think automotive is really interesting right now, not just because of electric vehicles needing to have sound, and so looking at sound from a branding standpoint. But I think we may see a shift in how we think of the automobile environment as we get more and more into self-driving cars. I think that there's a sonic environment around, an automobile where you're going to be thinking about soundscapes. You're going to be thinking about, oh, is there something I can listen to that will keep me from getting car sick because I'm not driving? And yes, believe it or not, there is some research into a sonic intervention for motion sickness. So that vehicle space, I think, has got a lot of opportunity. And I will say this, just as a little plug. If you follow social media, I'll probably be putting something out about it tomorrow. But I will be in New York, and Mike, I'll DM you later, and we'll find some time to get together. I'll be in New York on the 16th next week. There is a pop up that Mercedes-Benz has done in Chelsea, where they are giving you an opportunity to see their new electric vehicles. And I have put together a special presentation that's part TED Talk, part silent disco, where you will listen to the program through headphones as I deliver it live in front of you for a limited audience, but it's a sonic exploration in 4 acts, where we'll go through the physiology of sound, we'll look at sensory perception, we'll look at sonic tonics, and then we bring it all together into a look at what Mercedes has done sonically with their new EQ line to bring it to life. And I got to tell you, it is amazing the things they have done. Everything from the vehicle will make a sound as you approach it, to soundscapes that will relax you, to 10-minute programs while you're doing a power charge, things that you can listen to change the environment. The use of pink noise as a safety device before you crash, to kind of shut down your hearing system so you won't be as affected adversely by the loudness of the crash. So I'm going to be doing that live. There are going to be RSVPs, so you can take a look for that. If you're interested in coming, you can do that. But again, I just mentioned that as an example of how serious automotive makers are now about the sonic space. They've always been, but vehicles more and more are becoming these environments that people will inhabit. And I could even see, you know, at some point you'll be going out to your car to experience your entertainment while it's in the garage, because it's just going to be that.
It's amazing. What I am the most excited about in the whole world of audio right now is the incorporation of Dolby Atmos and 3D sound. It's at its infancy. In my lifetime, I've seen all the visual modalities in terms of film and, editing and animation have just grown exponentially, but we're still listening to everything in stereo. I mean, yes, there is surround sound at a theatrical experience, but it's a screenless world. We're running around, and I just think it's going to be amazing for an entertainment prospect, just listening to, as simple as entertainment podcasts. Of course, music, a lot of the things right now, everybody's diving into it. I actually just listened to, just funny side note, I've been on Apple Music, whose album? Oh, Phineas. I just listened to the new Phineas album, and I put on Dolby Atmos, and I kept hitting it in mono and hearing everything phase out and disappear. And it's just interesting to me to see that it's people toying with this technology at its infancy, and I think it's going to be something awesome in the future. And even incorporated in cars. I'm sure they're working on that now in terms of how to get 3D sound in cars. So
Yeah,
Steve's probably going to tell me it's in the Mercedes, right?
Mercedes is working on the whole Dolby Atmos spatial sound in their vehicles coming out. Yeah.
Awesome.
That is so awesome. I'm so glad I asked you guys. I'm excited about everything you just said. The automotive space, definitely curious to what the metaverse is going to mean, especially for all things. I mean, sync in general and metaverse is a whole other discussion that I'm excited to get into talking about. And then of course, definitely the 3D spatial Adobe, all those applications. So really, really cool. Mike, Steve, I appreciate you taking all this time. So I think Steve, you told them about the thing coming up? Did you give your socials, or the link on your profile the best way for people to follow you?
Yeah, the link on the profile is the best. I've got Twitter there. You can look me up on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active on both of those channels. I have an Instagram, but it's mostly my photography from when I'm traveling around. So I haven't posted much on there, but because of COVID. But yeah, follow me on Twitter.
Really good pictures, though, Steve. Like the photography is pretty awesome.
I'm better off on LinkedIn myself. I'm not on Twitter very often. I have an Instagram. To tell you the truth, my daughter posts for me on Instagram more than I do. So, but I'm on LinkedIn a lot. So reach out if anybody wants to chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking all this time, answering questions, just shining insight into something that we don't talk much about. Really, really appreciate it. It was just a great discussion, and so I'm thankful for that. So for the room, we are going to transition. If you're here, we're going to transition to our after party. That is, as soon as this room shuts down, I'll open up that room. And in that room, we don't talk about sync or music really. We just kind of, it's a time for control camp members to get to know one another. We're all about community at all levels of sync. Doesn't matter whether you're aspiring or experienced composer or supervisor, what have you. This is our time to come together and just get to know one another. So I invite everyone to come over there. We don't just have a stage. Anyone can come up onto the stage. As soon as you come in, if you want to come up, you just raise your hand and you're pulled up automatically. Um, you have to be following Control Camp, so click on the green house and hit follow. And if you want to know more about us, our opportunities, we talked about the briefs that we did in the beginning. You can go to controlcamp.com /sign up. Let me see, I haven't actually tried this pin a link in here while I'm talking. Nope, can't do two things at the same time. So if you go to controlcamp.com, you can actually find out more about us, and on our homepage, you can sign up for a mailing list. That gets you into the community. It gets you access to future briefs that we do, listening sessions. I'm often doing listening sessions here on Clubhouse, also when I go live on Instagram or on TikTok. So if you follow me in those places, if you want to share music, that's the place to share music. I love hosting these conversations. I share my experience with NSYNC, and then I bring you other voices so that you can get as many different opinions, areas of experience, just to find out. I was just having a conversation with some composers yesterday. Most of us came through sync in the same way, and we got access to one area of sync. We knew about music libraries. We submitted to music libraries and got lots of placements through those libraries. And it was only through like relationships that we found that we opened up all these other aspects within sync that we didn't know about. There's doing custom work for brands, there's working directly on television shows, there's pitching to advertising companies, or building a network of music supervisors, things that I've been exposed to within the last couple of years that I didn't know about at all for the first 5 or 6 years of working. And so my passion with Control Camp is bringing people together, bringing a community together, so that you as an audience just get access to what's out there, and then you can choose your lane. You can find information. If the information gets you spark some of your passion, you can say, "Oh, I didn't know about sonic branding. Let me figure out how to, if that's something that might work. I like the psychology aspect of it. I like the science aspect of it. But now I know about it, I can make some choices. So information leads to choices, and that's what we're here for." Mike, Steve, thank you again. I know we see you in here all the time, so I know we'll see you again. I just appreciate you taking so much time to share the information.
My pleasure. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Thanks for pulling it together and bringing us into the room.
Appreciate you all. All right. So everyone, we'll see you. Our next room will be this Sunday, Film Score Convo with Matthew Head, Emmy Award winning composer who's not right now working on hit show Queens on ABC and P-Valley on Showtime. We talk about this film scoring process on Sundays. This last Sunday we had to cancel at the last minute. He often gets pulled onto set, and so all of our Sunday sessions are tentative. If you're following Control Camp's Instagram page, which is at Control Camp, on the day of, on Sunday, we post in the morning whether the room will go forward. Out of the last 4 weeks, we've had the room 2 or 3 times. We only canceled once, I think. So that'll be Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern, which is 10 a.m. Pacific, and then we'll be back here next Wednesday. All right. Thank you all very much. Hang in and come into the after party so I can get to know your names. Otherwise, have a good night. We'll see you next time.
Night.